Chapter 30, The Lovers, Antony's POV. No matter how much Antony wished Hanyu hadn't forced him into a punishment, he couldn't help admiring the boy's acting abilities. He never would have thought that irrepressible Hanyu could make such a convincing display of fear without once cracking a smile or giggle. Caning Hanyu felt wrong. Not that he was doing it at all, but that Marcus's presence forced him to do it all wrong. No warm-up with his hand, no check-ins to ensure that the boy was all right, no way for Hanyu to ask for it all to stop, which he usually offered to humans even when they were under discipline. Well, he supposed the boy could technically plead for mercy, but Hanyu's training was unlikely to allow for such things without Antony's express permission, and even if he did, there was no safe way for Antony to relent. It was simply going to be a terrible spanking, and there was no way around that. He was relieved when the knock allowed him to cut the charade short, though he winced internally when he saw Hanyu's arousal. He wished the boy weren't so ashamed of his body's response. It wasn't anything unusual or worth such shame, though of course Marcus's guffaws were likely to put the poor fellow at ease. Should Antony have given the beating differently? It was hard to put aside centuries of practice in making canings as pleasant as possible for the recipient, but perhaps a more painful punishment would have produced a less embarrassing result. Regardless, he was glad to see Hanyu leaving with his friend. His quick thinking had saved Asao from a good deal of unpleasantness, either forced sex with Antony or punishment for failing to ensure the first. Antony still wasn't quite sure what he would have done. He thought he knew, though. Marcus was entirely too clear-sighted when it came to him. He would have done whatever his lover demanded to keep Asao out of trouble. As long as he hadn't required a trade, anyhow. Antony wasn't handing Hanyu over, not even for an hour, not even with him in the room. He would have to scold Hanyu for the way he'd solved the problem. It wasn't his attendant's job to use himself as a distraction. Still, he admired the cleverness and pluck of the solution. "They're almost more trouble than they're worth, aren't they?" Marcus chuckled, as the door shut behind the two offerings. "Hardly," Antony snorted. "I don't know how well you remember the years before we started taking offerings, but I don't care to repeat them. Starving does not do wonders for my temperament." Antony's empty belly squeezed tight at the thought of food. It had been several days since he'd fed properly, and yesterday he'd barely had a sip before Hanyu swooned. "Does anything?" Marcus laughed at Antony's answering scowl and put his arms around him. "Don't glare like that, Annie. It just makes me want to kiss it off you." Antony found himself relaxing into his lover's familiar embrace. Even after all these years, it thrilled him a little to feel how thick and strong Marcus's arm was around him. Back when he'd been a boy princeling swooning over the new captain of his father's guard, he'd fantasized night after night about how it would feel to be held in these powerful arms. It had taken almost 400 years, but eventually he'd gotten his wish. In fact, his relationship with Marcus was the only thing about his life that had turned out remotely the way he'd wanted before the curse. "You know, I'd say that was a fortunate interruption from your little plaything," Marcus said, so close to Antony's ear that his lips brushed the lobe. Antony couldn't resist a shiver at the delicate touch, and Marcus chuckled dark and low and pulled him in tighter. "I would much rather have you to myself than share you with my attendant." "Oh?" Antony tried to keep his voice steady and unmoved, though his lover's attention was going straight to his groin. "Suppose you did have me to yourself. What would you do with me?" Marcus hummed musingly, and his tongue slipped out of his mouth and trailed idly up and down Antony's earlobe. Antony had to swallow down an embarrassing whine. "I think," Marcus purred into his neck, "that I would strip you down, spread you out, and taste every last inch of you. I'd like to see what kind of noises I could coax out of your oh-so-cranky self. That's what I would do." This time, Antony couldn't hold back the tiny whimper that rose in his throat. Marcus laughed breathily and nipped at his neck. "I take it you're amendable," he teased. Yes, this was it. This was right. This was what no one else ever got to see. Marcus's tenderness, his sweetness, the strength that let Antony relax entirely into him. No one else made him feel so safe and cared for. It was like a secret that he shared only with Marcus's offerings. The war god might be a difficult lover to please, but when he was pleased, there was no one sweeter, gentler, more attentive. Antony sagged in his lover's arms and gave himself over entirely. "Oh, yes," Marcus breathed as Antony unwound against him. "Yes, Annie, yes, that's right. Let me take care of you." Antony did. He let Marcus pull his clothes off and kiss him cross-eyed after every bit of fabric fluttered to the carpet. He drank up Marcus's breathy compliments and lingering touches. He let him undo his braid and send his long silver sweep of hair tangling down his back. He even let his lover lift him into his arms and carry him to the bed, if a little reluctantly. "My legs work," he grumbled as Marcus hoisted him. "Of course they do, darling," the bigger vampire soothed. "But you fit in my arms so perfectly, it would be a crime not to take advantage." Marcus laid him on the bed as though he were a thing owed gentleness. Then, true to his word, he covered his chest and belly with kisses so searing Antony didn't even miss warmth. Finally, he settled on Antony's right hip and nibbled and suckled at the spot until Antony couldn't even think straight. "Marcus," he gasped, "stop teasing." "How can I when you're so tasty?" Marcus growled, but he started moving again. He nibbled an icy trail down Antony's thigh, flicking his tongue briefly over his balls, but then continuing down rather than up. Antony's whine of frustration ended in a gasp as Marcus's questing tongue found his hole. He lapped and probed until Antony was keening. The high, desperate noises shamed him, but not as much as the moment when he finally broke down and begged. "Marcus, please," he gasped. "Please, I need—" "Easy, Annie." Marcus pulled back and ran a lazy finger up and down his slick crack. "I know what you need better than you do. I'm the only one who can give it to you, and I always deliver." The finger pushed into him at the same moment that Marcus brought his mouth down on Antony's aching cock. Marcus alternated between slow, teasing movements and more vigorous sucking. No matter how rapidly he bobbed his head up and down, he never broke his steady, challenging eye contact. He hummed, low and tuneless, around Antony's cock. When he crooked his finger, Antony shuddered in helpless pleasure. "More," he managed. Marcus smiled and hummed louder and added a second finger, then a third. It seemed like an ecstatic, torturous hour later that Marcus stopped toying with him and opened his throat. A few hard swallows around Antony's dick and a final crooking of the fingers inside him pushed Antony over the edge, and his pleading moans tapered off into silent ecstasy. He lay still for only a moment, panting and dizzy with pleasure. Then he cracked an eye and gazed down at his lover. Marcus was still holding his softening dick in his mouth, but he managed to smile angelically around it. The man even batted his eyelashes. "Oh, enough with the innocent looks," Antony managed, his voice hardly more than a rasp. "You've opened me up. Now it's time to fuck me." Another eyelash flutter, then Marcus let his cock fall and lifted himself to his knees. "My lord's wish is my command, as always." When he slid into Antony's oversensitive hole, the line between pleasure and overstimulation blurred into a heady, full-body sensation better than any drug Antony could remember. He wailed like a maiden cat and couldn't even manage to be embarrassed. Marcus gave him a moment to adjust, but only a moment, and then he was thrusting and moaning himself, and it was all so good. But the best was afterwards. The best was lying, sated and exhausted, against Marcus's broad chest while his lover played with his hair and smiled down at him with so much adoration in his big dark eyes that Antony felt like the center of the universe. "I love you," Antony whispered, still half frightened by the words after all this time. Marcus smiled and leaned down to press a kiss to his lips. "I love you too, Antony." He laughed. "I love your name. It feels almost sinful to say. It's all tongue. Antony." "You're ridiculous." Antony meant the words to be biting, but they were soft and foolish with fondness. "If you like it so much, why don't you ever use it?" "Everyone calls you Antony. Annie is mine." There were some more languid kisses. Then Marcus rolled off the bed and stretched. Antony fought down the desire to beg him to stay, to keep holding him, to preserve this perfect moment just a little longer. "I'd say that was a pretty good thank you, wouldn't you, Annie?" "Adequate." Antony was still too weak with love and pleasure to muster any real grouchiness. Still, the mention of the thank you reminded him of what he was being thanked for. "But I've been meaning to ask, what did you mean about me helping with your scene with Esau?" "Just what I said." Marcus padded towards the washroom. Antony felt an absurd pang of sadness when he lost sight of his lover. "Come back." The boy was nervous about being punished, but when you stepped in like some kind of sacrificial lamb, I think you really convinced him he was about to get beaten to a pulp. He hasn't put a toe out of line since. "But—" Antony had to be careful how he worded this. He couldn't let himself get so high on sex and closeness that he forgot to be careful. "You were going to hurt him." I was going to punish him, of course, but it wouldn't have incapacitated him. Really, you're getting so terribly sentimental about things in your old age. Is that what you want with this rude blonde one? A pet? Anyhow, that was over 2 weeks ago. Why are you still on about it? Antony couldn't let himself get sidetracked. But after he was gone, you still... he wasn't there to see. You didn't have to... Was I too rough with you? Antony wished he could see Marcus's face, could judge if that edge of mockery were real or his own imagination. Come now, Annie. We both know you can handle more than that. Anyhow, you were the one who offered. You said I could do whatever I wanted. It's not fair to get pissy with me about it afterwards. I didn't mean... Damn it, he was stammering like a child. Marcus stepped out of the washroom, his face scrubbed and his hair neat. He was looking at Antony with such palatable disappointment that Antony felt himself shriveling. Panic thudded through him, chasing away the last shreds of post-coital drowsiness. What had he said? Where had he gone wrong? Antony, I know you grew up at court, and you had to learn to be manipulative and two-faced, but that was all so long ago. I can't be with someone who says something is all right and then goes back on it. I need to be able to trust you. No court games in the bedroom, remember? We've been over this so many times. Are you even trying to be trustworthy anymore? I am trying. Antony was mortified to realize that he was crying. When had that started? I wasn't being... Not this again. Marcus's face went cold. He turned away from the bed and headed to the sitting room, where he began pulling on his clothes. You know that won't work on me. Crying doesn't make the problem go away. I'm sorry. Antony stumbled off the bed and scrubbed wildly at his face as he rushed to Marcus's side. I'm not trying to cry, I promise. I just didn't mean... I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything about it. I'm sorry. I'll do better. Marcus kept his back turned as he pulled his shirt down over his head, and Antony had to concentrate to keep more traitorous tears from falling. Why did he always get so tongue-tied and stupid when they argued? Why did he always start arguments? Everything had been perfect and wonderful, and he'd ruined it. He always ruined it. Please, Marcus, he tried again. I'm sorry. Of course you're right. I shouldn't have... I'm sorry. Please? It's all right. Marcus's soothing tone cut through Antony's misery, and his lover's wide, rough thumb brushed at the few remaining tears on his face. I know you didn't mean to do it. It's how you were raised. You can't really help being manipulative sometimes. But that's why you keep me around, right? You can always count on me to call you out on it. You know I won't let you get away with that kind of behavior. You need me to keep you honest. Antony nodded despairingly. He couldn't speak or he would start crying again, and that would be the worst thing he could do right now. Still, the appeal in his eyes must have been enough. Marcus shrugged on his overcoat, then dropped a kiss on his forehead. It's all right, Annie. I forgive you, and I'm sorry if you feel like I was too rough with you the other day. Then he cracked a mischievous smile that made Antony feel just the tiniest bit better. But we both know you liked it. A few more kisses and reassuring words, then Marcus was gone. Antony stood naked in the middle of his sitting room and stared bleakly around at the mess of clothes and bedsheets he needed to put to rights. He found it hard to muster the willpower to actually pick anything up, or the energy. He needed to eat soon. His hands were shaking a little, though whether the reactions came from hunger or emotion, it was hard to say. Why was he so sneaky and manipulative and terrible at love and relationships? No wonder he made Marcus so angry. Who else would put up with him? Hanyu only wanted him because he didn't know any better. Well, he'd know pretty quickly if he came back to this mess. Antony set to work and wished that the hours would fly faster. Maybe the boy was just too young and human to see how terrible he was, but still, he couldn't wait for Hanyu to come home.